Good day. You are watching a live view from the Mission Control Room in Dulles, Virginia, where the orbital ATK flight controllers are standing by to begin the steps that will be commanded to deploy the solar arrays on the recently launched SS Gene Cernan, the Cygnus resupply ship that lifted off from Pad 0A at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport in Wallops Island, Virginia, at the Wallops Flight Facility not quite an hour and a half ago. Under the direction of Mission Director Ken Peak, this team of flight controllers is going through the preliminary steps of heating up the heaters on the solar arrays prior to the start of the firing of pyrotechnics that will release the solar arrays, the two Ultraflex solar arrays on Cygnus, one after the other. They will unfurl and then rotate into the proper orientation for the rest of Cygnus's two-day trip to the International Space Station. Here in the flight control room for the International Space Station at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, a shift handover is about to begin as the Orbit 2 team has come on console here on a Sunday morning, ready to take over control of space station operations for the Expedition 53 crew aboard the orbital outpost, which is currently orbiting 251 miles above the Earth, passing from southwest to northeast, just to the east of the Philippine Islands. The crew watched an uplink of the launch sent to them by the flight controllers here in Houston. They did not make any particular comments about the launch, but they were privy to watching the liftoff of the Antares rocket off of the launch pad and its 9-minute journey to deliver the Cygnus spacecraft into its preliminary orbit. There was a 5-minute launch window available today for the team at Wallops. And the 5-minute launch window proved very useful as the flight control team and the launch controllers down in Wallops waited to make sure that everything was in readiness for the launch of Antares, which lifted off from its launch pad at 7:19 and 51 seconds a.m. Eastern Time at the end of the 5-minute launch window. The rocket, the two-stage Antares rocket, flew true, a perfect ascent to deliver the Cygnus spacecraft into orbit in its preliminary orbit some 9 minutes and 6 seconds after liftoff. Cygnus now is en route to the International Space Station. Once the solar arrays are deployed, there will be a series of rendezvous burns from the Cygnus engine that will take place later today, and a variety of refinement burns to raise the altitude of Cygnus and to fine-tune its path to the International Space Station. The liftoff of the Cygnus spacecraft sends it on a 2-day journey to the International Space Station. So the stage is now set for an arrival on Tuesday, as we mentioned, where Expedition 53 flight engineer Paolo Nespoli of the European Space Agency and Station Commander Randy Bresnik will be standing by in the wee hours Tuesday morning at the Cupola robotic workstation to use the Canadarm2 robotic arm to reach out and grapple Cygnus out of its orbit. That grapple time is scheduled at 3:50 a.m. Central Time, 4:50 a.m. Eastern Time. That will be followed by the crew handing off the robotic chores to the ground controllers here in Houston, who will maneuver Cygnus to its installation position on the Earth-facing side of the Unity module. Once it is bolted into place, Cygnus will spend several weeks at the station with its unberthing scheduled on December 3rd. It will be maneuvered to the space-facing side of the Harmony module, Node 2, on the station to collect GPS data and other engineering data in preparation for use by the commercial crew program to characterize any RF interference or GPS characterizations that may be useful for the future rendezvous and dockings of commercial crew vehicles to international docking adapters on the forward and the space-facing side of the Harmony module. Finally, Cygnus will be released for good on December 4th, and will conduct a variety of engineering tests and the deployment of a variety of nanosatellites, very small satellites, before it is due to deorbit and burn up in the Earth's atmosphere on December 18th. So we are standing by for the initial phase of the commanding for the deployment of the solar arrays. That should get underway here shortly. Once deployed, the team that you're looking at there in Dulles, Virginia, at the Orbital ATK Flight Control Room, will verify that the spacecraft is power positive, and that will set the stage for the rest of Cygnus's trek to the International Space Station. As we await word from the launch from the flight control room, the mission control room for Orbital ATK there in Dulles, Virginia, a quick animated clip of what this all looks like. The Cygnus spacecraft, again, with its ultraflex solar arrays having been deployed and oriented in the correct position to provide power-producing capability for the spacecraft as it heads toward the International Space Station. Once it is berthed to the space-facing side of the Unity module, the spacecraft will be put on internal power from the International Space Station itself until it is time for the vehicle to be unberthed in early December and sent on its way. Cygnus is loaded with 7,400 pounds of supplies and scientific experiments for the Expedition 53 crew, a variety of experiments and supplies that will be used by the crew on board the station, as well as the next expedition crew, Expedition 54, that is scheduled to launch from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan on December 17th. Just a quick programming note. Once we wrap up our solar array deployment coverage on NASA television, the next event will be coming up in about an hour and a half or so. That will be the post-launch news conference by officials at the Wallops Flight Facility in Virginia. That's scheduled at 9:30 Central Time, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time on NASA television. But first things first, as we wait for the commanding to begin the process of deploying the two Ultraflex solar arrays. We're expecting the commanding for the start of the solar array deployment on Cygnus almost any time now. There are various sequences that are loaded into the commanding that is uplinked to the spacecraft. So we're standing by for word of the start of the process to begin the deployment of the solar arrays that will complete the most critical phase of today's mission that began with the launch of the Antares rocket 1 hour 37 minutes ago from Wallops. Once again, the reports out of Dulles and from the visiting vehicle officer here in Mission Control in Houston indicate that Cygnus is right on the money in terms of its flight path to the International Space Station. A number of engine firings are planned later today and tomorrow to refine the path of Cygnus to the International Space Station, first raising its altitude and then precisely pinpointing its trajectory for an arrival in the vicinity of the International Space Station in the wee hours Tuesday morning. The capture of Cygnus by Expedition 53 crew members Paolo Nespoli and Randy Bresnik is scheduled for 3:50 a.m. Central Time, 4:50 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday morning. Our rendezvous and capture coverage on NASA TV on Tuesday begins at 2:15 a.m. Central, 3:15 a.m. Eastern Time. And the word from the orbital ATK flight control team in Dulles that you're looking at is that the commanding is now underway to begin the pyrotechnic firing of the bolts holding the two Ultraflex solar arrays in place. We'll keep you posted. The bolts that are holding those, that held those solar arrays in place, are methodically being fired to release the solar array wing, and the actual unfurling of the Ultraflex solar array face, if you will, that then will be oriented in the correct position to track the sun. The International Space Station is currently flying 251 miles over the North Pacific. It will pass just to the south of the Kamchatka Peninsula of Alaska before it makes its way on a northwest to southeasterly track on this upcoming orbit of the Earth. Again, the firing, the pyrotechnic firing of the bolts holding the two solar array wings is underway. We'll continue to monitor the unfurling of those arrays and the orientation of those arrays into the correct position. All of Cygnus's systems are reported to be in excellent shape by the flight controllers that you're looking at there in Dulles, Virginia. Once again, the launch earlier today occurring at 7:19 and 51 seconds a.m. Eastern Time at the completion of the 5-minute launch window that was available for the launch control team for Orbital ATK down in Wallops, Virginia. The launch was flawless. 9 minutes and 6 seconds after launch, Cygnus separated from the upper stage of the Antares rocket. All the bolts for both of the solar array wings continue to fire. The pyrotechnics in sequential fashion required to release those wings. No issues reported so far as we await the completion of the unfurling and orientation of both solar array wings. This is Mission Control Houston. You're looking at the Orbital ATK Flight Control Room in Dulles, Virginia, as the methodical deployment sequence for the two ultraflex solar arrays on the Cygnus spacecraft, dubbed the SS Gene Cernan, continue to move along in good fashion The frangible bolts holding those two solar array wings in place are firing as advertised, standing by for further word on the actual deployment, the unfurling, the staging, unfurling, and rotation of those arrays. Here in Mission Control in Houston, as we stand by for further word on the sequential deployment of the Cygnus's solar arrays, a shift handover has been completed. The Orbit 2 team of flight controllers on console now on this Sunday, overseeing the work of the Expedition 53 crew on board the station. In the red shirt is Flight Director Ed Van Cise as he gets settled in for his day's worth of work. In the lower right-hand corner of your screen is Jerry Yancharis, who is the lead visiting vehicle officer for this mission of Cygnus to the International Space Station. He has been succeeded on console for the Orbit 2 shift by Ray Bigeness, another visiting vehicle officer who will be on console for the next 8 hours or so. In the view is the Canadarm2 robotic arm that has been maneuvered into position by ground controllers in the correct orientation for the forthcoming capture of Cygnus on Tuesday morning. Again, it will be up to Paolo Nespoli of the European Space Agency and Station Commander Randy Bresnik of NASA to reach out and capture Cygnus once it arrives in the vicinity of the International Space Station. The grapple of the orbital ATK resupply craft scheduled for 3:50 a.m. Central Time, 4:50 a.m. Eastern Time on Tuesday morning. The International Space Station is currently flying from northwest to southeast over Washington State on a path that will carry it across Idaho, Utah, Colorado, and just to the southwest of Dallas. A short time from now, as the station and its 6 residents fly into an orbital sunrise. The solar array deployment sequence continues, being monitored in Dulles, Virginia, by Orbital ATK's flight controllers under the direction of Mission Director Ken Peake. Word now from Orbital ATK out of Dulles that the first of the 2 solar arrays has unfurled. And word now received that both of Cygnus's solar arrays have deployed. Standing by for a condition report, but everything looks great. So system verification of the solar arrays underway by the flight control team there in Dulles, but both solar arrays have now been deployed. That confirmed at 8:15 a.m. Central Time. Not quite 2 hours after Cygnus was launched atop the Antares rocket by Orbital ATK from Launch Pad 0A at the Mid-Atlantic Regional Spaceport at Wallops Island, Virginia. The arrays momentarily will begin to slew into the correct orientation. Everything looking good aboard Cygnus, all of its systems in excellent shape. This is Mission Control Houston. The flight control team for Orbital ATK in Dulles now in its post-solar array deploy checklist, verifying the rest of Cygnus's systems. Again, both of Cygnus's solar arrays have been successfully deployed. That confirmed just a few minutes ago at 8:15 a.m. Central Time. So a flawless morning for the Antares rocket lifting off at the end of a 5-minute launch window available down in Wallops. The launch occurring at 7:19 and 51 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. A perfect launch. Cygnus delivered into its preliminary orbit 9 minutes and 6 seconds after launch, and just a few moments ago, the completion of the deployment of the twin Ultraflex solar arrays. Cygnus well on its way on a 2-day journey to deliver 7,400 pounds of supplies and scientific experiments to the Expedition 53 crew aboard the International Space Station. There will be a series of rendezvous burns of the Cygnus engine over the course of the next 2 days to raise its altitude and refine its path to the station, where Expedition 53 flight engineer Paolo Nespoli of the European Space Agency and Station Commander Randy Bresnik of NASA will be standing by in the cupola at the robotics workstation, ready to use the Canadarm2 robotic arm to reach out and capture Cygnus for its installation on the Earth-facing side of the Unity module and a 3-week stay at the orbital outpost. So with that, we'll wrap up our coverage. 2 programming notes. Coming up a little over an hour from now at 9:30 Central Time, 10:30 Eastern Time will be the post-launch news conference out of Wallops, Virginia, at the Wallops Flight Facility to recap all of today's activities relative to the launch and the deployment of Cygnus's solar arrays. And on Tuesday, we'll be back here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston with our coverage of the rendezvous and capture of Cygnus, with our coverage beginning in the wee hours Tuesday at 2:15 a.m. Central Time, 3:15 a.m. Eastern Time. Capture is scheduled at 3:50 a.m. Eastern, 4:50 a.m. Eastern Time, 3:50 a.m. Central Time. We also will be on the air later in the morning with installation coverage, and we'll keep you up to date on all of the activities relative to the progress of Cygnus to the International Space Station. You can also follow all of that on the website at www.nasa.gov/station. For now, we'll wrap up our coverage on this Sunday morning. A flawless launch for the Cygnus resupply craft from Wallops, Virginia. Its solar arrays are out. Cygnus is on its way for a Tuesday arrival at the International Space Station. For now, we wish you a great rest of the weekend. This is Mission Control Houston.
Hey, you're watching NASA TV, on the air and online every day, on this planet and beyond.